It's time for the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith. Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So last week we talked about this Packers Sanitation Services Incorporated story about how, again, we're making child labor great again. Moving back to the good old days when, those kids with the really small hands could get into those small places and, clean those blades for, cutting the brisket and processing meat and doing little hands, do great work. And states like Iowa, what is going on in Iowa? They're trying to make child labor great again. And again, this is what happens when you cut down on immigrant labor coming in. You need cheap exploitable labor somehow. Where are we going to get it? We're going to get it from the grade schools. Here to share some thoughts on that most recent story and where we're going as a country, I've asked Jordan Barab to come talk with us. Jordan's a favor, former acting assistant secretary and deputy assistant secretary of labor at OSHA during the Obama years. He's also one of my go-to guys on anything health and safety. His blog, jordanbarab.com/confined space, a must read. Jordan, thanks for taking time for us.
Glad to be here, Rick. Thanks for inviting me.
So I'm looking at this story, and we've seen a bunch of these recently coming, especially out of the meatpacking industry, where you've got these kids, working the overnight shift, 13, 14, 15 years old before they go into school in the morning, and now we're really trying to put this in the legislation in places like Iowa. This is a major step backwards that I don't think most people are paying as much attention to. I'm curious your thoughts.
Yeah, according to some of the legislators in Iowa and some other states, the solution to child labor is more child labor. I think what we're seeing here is kind of a corporate response to the labor shortage, that came out of COVID and people quitting jobs and, organizing their workplaces. They're looking, as you said, for more vulnerable workers that they can underpay and who won't complain. And who's more vulnerable than a child? And especially when you look at PSSI, these were not just children. These were children of immigrants, many of whom didn't even speak English. So, they didn't know what they were doing. They didn't know, how to complain. I mean, you can't get much more vulnerable than that population.
Yeah, isn't that the point, though? I mean, when you stop and look at it, when in fact, we've had J.D. Scholten, a state representative from Iowa, and Sammy Sheets, another rep from Iowa, on to talk about this legislation. And, I had to say, look, those aren't going to be my kids doing those jobs. Those are going to be poor and extremely poor working class kids, mostly going to be immigrants and people of color. Not going to be my kids or yours.
No, exactly. Yeah, our kids are going to do internships or, babysit or, work at grocery stores. I mean, there's, work is good for kids. I worked when I was a kid, but I didn't work at dangerous jobs, and these kids shouldn't be working at dangerous jobs either. And the jobs, these PSSI jobs, these jobs cleaning the meatpacking plants are the most dangerous jobs that exist in industry. You're constantly seeing, grown-ups getting killed and maimed and limbs amputated in these jobs. It's just beyond belief that they would have kids working in these jobs.
Yeah, from the Department of Labor's report, it said children were working with hazardous chemicals and cleaning meat processing equipment, including back saws, brisket saws, and head splitters. I got to be honest, I don't know that's not just getting a job for a little extra money to learn work ethic. That's real dangerous kind of work.
It's dangerous work. Yeah, it doesn't pay well, but obviously, they need the money. I should say their families need the money. It's not unlikely some of their families may be undocumented workers, and they aren't going to complain either that their children are being abused. They need the money. Again, these are exploitable, vulnerable kids.
Now, this is just the extreme. I've been talking about this for a while, that we're headed on a path to go back to the good old days of the Lochner era, where if you're hungry enough and desperate enough to work for poverty wages in deplorable conditions, that's your right, buddy. It's your liberty. It's your liberty to go out and put yourself in dangerous conditions for poverty wages. Only we're going to update it to freedom, because that's the new buzzword. Am I off base here? Because I got to tell you, everywhere I look, things not going the right direction in my view.
No, exactly. And what? Things are getting worse. To the extent that You have many of these companies, they're subcontractors of the big companies. So the big companies are basically subcontracting out the responsibility for health and safety. They're subcontracting out, any chance of getting a union. This is what, David Weil, who used to be head of Wage and Hour Department of Labor under the Obama administration, calls the fissured workplace. Nobody's actually working for the main company anymore. Everybody's working for a subcontractor or some kind of, temporary firm or something like that. And that makes it, very difficult these days for agencies like OSHA or for Wage and Hour to enforce the law, because you're basically enforcing 20th century laws in a 21st century workplace. They don't match. The laws need to be updated. These agencies are terribly underfunded. They're tiny. Wage and Hour's budget is something like $250 million. OSHA's is only between $600 and $700 million. These are tiny, tiny budgets for the federal government. For these agencies that have responsibility for working conditions and fair wages and safety conditions all over the country, for every workplace in the country. It's absurd.
Oh, it's interesting, as I've had a couple people reach out to me and say there's some grand conspiracy, there's some nefarious plot, the end times are near, because look, we had an explosion. There's an explosion today in Bedford, Ohio. There was another explosion over the weekend at ArcelorMittal there in the Warren Coke plant. You've got the thing going on in East Palestine. All of this, and I'm going, no, this isn't some nefarious plot. This is what deregulation gets us. This is what corporate America policing themselves get us. And just because we're now paying attention doesn't mean this is new. You know as well as anyone, this stuff happens quite frequently. It just never rises to the level that we pay attention.
Exactly. Unless a whole lot of workers are killed at one time or a whole community is poisoned, nobody pays much attention to it, and nothing changes. It's only when there's a major catastrophe, really, that there's potential for change in these agencies' budgets and these agencies' laws. We hope something, good can come out of that. We've seen the right wing, going after Biden for this and going after Pete Buttigieg and that type of thing. I'd like to see them, if they really want to do something, all the MAGA people, get in line and support higher budgets for EPA, higher budgets for OSHA, for Wage and Hour, and strengthening the regulations and updating the laws.
And actually putting some teeth in the laws, not just EPA, OSHA, but also the National Labor Relations Board. There should be some actual penalties when you break the law. And I'm looking at what Norfolk Southern is doing right now. They're going around and said, hey, we're going to give everybody in this zip code $1,000. Look how wonderful we are doing this self-imposed fine thing. And you find out there's only like 8,000 people in the entire zip code. So it's not really costing them anything, but it is a great PR stunt.
Yeah, and PSSI only got fined $1.5 million for this whole child labor thing, and this is to PSSI is owned by Blackstone, which is a huge company, a huge limited equity firm, and it doesn't even make a dent. The same with any kind of OSHA fines, hardly even make a dent, in the budgets, bottom lines of large companies.
Yeah, we talked about this last week about how paltry these fines are. I think it was like $15,000 for each one of these violations. And you brought up a moment ago that these third-party logistics companies and these headhunters, these staffing services, these are folks who I think a lot of this stuff actually gets made able to have happen. Because, well, it's not our fault that the company sent us these people, because I was looking at the numbers of this PSSI group. There were 3 places that had like 22, 26, and 27 workers in it. And you go, that's not an accident. That's an on purpose. There's a headhunter out there bringing those kids, recruiting those kids to go into that factory. Maybe 1 or 2 you can get away with going, oh, we didn't know. But when you got 22, 26, or 27, that was planned, that was schemed. They did that on purpose.
Yeah, and you've got these huge companies like JBS and Cargill who are, shocked that this is going on, in their plants. And even PSSI is shocked. They can't believe that, they're actually doing this. And yet they did everything they could not to cooperate with Wage and Hour. But nevertheless, they had allegedly had no idea this was going on.
Yeah. So what's the answer, Jordan? Going forward, there's a lot of problems out here. As I've been focusing on the fact that, we have very different views politically. My friends on the right believe there should be no regulations. Let the corporations police themselves because they're going to act in their best interest. Is that I see that as a failed ideology. I'm curious where you find yourself on that thought.
Well, as you say, Rick, I mean, this is what capitalism is. I mean, corporations obviously want to maximize their profits, and that's the way the system works. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. But to go along with that, you need regulation. You need a government presence there to actually control what would otherwise be just uncontrolled exploitation of the workforce and of consumers, for that matter. So you need, as I mentioned before, you need to modernize the laws. Now, that's obviously not going to happen too soon, the way our political situation is. You need to increase agency funding. As I said, these agencies are tiny. You need to mandate corporate responsibility. And what I mean by that is that the big companies need to be also responsible for the crimes of their subcontractors. And the temporary firms need to also be responsible, for the host employers and vice versa. Now, OSHA's been doing some of that and holding both sides responsible, but it's really hard when you have these subcontracting, arrangements. You can't really hold the companies at the top vulnerable with the laws that we have right now. But probably more important, you really need to educate and empower these vulnerable workers. OSHA has this very small, but has a grant program where they're training, unions and other worker organizations who actually have access to these workers, because OSHA can't reach these workers, but churches and other organizations can reach these workers. So they need to be trained, they need to be empowered, they need to understand what the hazards are, how to complain about them, and they need to be protected, especially if they're undocumented, because even undocumented workers legally deserve the same protection that documented workers do. And finally, of course, you need more unions in these places. I mean, again, the whole process of subcontracting and everything, one of the reasons for that is to get rid of unions. The main company may be unionized, but they don't want to unionize the people that are actually cleaning the place, because they don't have to pay them well, they don't have to take care of their health and safety. They get away with a hell of a lot. If parts of their plan, especially the most dangerous parts of the work in these places, are not unionized.
Yeah. Now, the interesting thing is, since you brought that up, is I have a friend who was one of these headhunters, worked for a staffing agency, and he said it was interesting how they would ask for people to come in, and then almost immediately they were put into the most dangerous jobs because they weren't their employees. They were just people that they churned through. And this is 10, 15 years ago. I can't imagine how much worse it's gotten.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the other thing, Rick, I mean, you mentioned this at the beginning, but, there are not thousands, but probably millions of workers just over the border, or even in this country, that are still undocumented, that would love to have these jobs. We don't really have we don't need to have a labor shortage here if we don't want a labor shortage. There's plenty of workers out there that will do these jobs, ideally, for better wages and better benefits and more protections. But, this whole idea there's a labor shortage when we could have a reasonable immigration system is just ridiculous.
You listen to the Rick Smith Show here with Jordan Barab, former acting Assistant Secretary and Deputy Assistant Secretary of Labor for OSHA during the Obama years. He's also my go-to guy on health and safety stuff. Check out his website, jordanbarab.com/confined space. We'll get links out on social media, how you can take a look at that. Now, I want to get some of your thoughts on what we saw happen out in East Palestine. We find out that these trains are getting bigger, they're heavier, the load distributions are different, they want fewer people on the trains. It just seems like all of the push to not regulate them, to not make them change, to not make them spend the billions and billions of dollars they're spending on stock buybacks and enriching themselves hasn't filtered down to safety. Is this a moment where we hold someone accountable, or is this just another one of those moments where it's in the news for a couple of days? Once the flames go down, we forget about it until the next time. I'm curious how you see this playing out.
Well, I think that's something, we need to make sure it isn't forgotten. No, you're right. I mean, this is, we started to look at this problem, during the labor issues, in the fall when there was almost a strike with railroad workers. And you have this new phenomenon, which you kind of mentioned, which is called, precision scheduled railroading, where they're trying to cut costs everywhere. Now, in the fall, we focused on the fact that precision scheduled railroading, didn't allow for any kind of sick leave time for workers. And everybody said, oh, that's too bad, but we can't have a strike. Well, the thing with precision scheduled railroading is it not only cuts back on workers, time off and on sick leave, it also cuts back on maintenance. It makes for longer trains, as you said. One-man train crews, that's what the railroads would like to have, one man, and ultimately they probably want nobody on the train. They'd like no staff. They'd like it completely automated, which is absurd when you have these trains that are 1.5 and 2 miles long. First of all, to have one person on these trains, what if, the bearings on this train, who knows how far back started burning. That's supposedly, what led to the thing in East Palestine. What do? You're an engineer. You're the only one on the train. You stop the train and walk back for 1.5 miles to see what's going on. If you talk to any railroaders these days, they aren't surprised that this happened. They're surprised that it hadn't happened yet and that it wasn't worse. And we saw a lot worse. You may remember, almost 10 years ago in Lac Megantic in Canada, when a train, again, a very poorly maintained train, only one person on it, the train stalled on a hill. They told the guy to go to a hotel. They'd fix it. The train caught fire. The brakes let loose. It came rolling down into this town of Lac Megantic at a huge speed, carrying all kinds of crude oil, derailed, crashed, exploded, and killed 47 people in that town, destroyed the whole downtown. That's the kind of thing we're going to be looking at more and more now with this precision scheduled railroading and constantly cutting back on maintenance, making the trains longer, and cutting back on staff.
Yeah, but again, you look at this, and this is another example of what we've allowed to have happen across industry. This mass consolidation, where I understand, in the '80s there were upwards of 40 different train companies. Now we got 6.
Yeah.
With this kind of consolidation, this kind of enormous amount of profit that they then use to spin into lobbying operations to push back on any regulations or any changes, they seem to hold all the cards because we're told. And again, I have my conservative friends who tell me all the time, they're going to do what's in their best interest. So they don't want these kind of disasters because they don't want to have to spend the money. So they're going to do the right thing. And I'm going, I don't buy that on any level.
No. And we saw the hazmat railroad regulations weakened somewhat during the Obama administration even, and then Trump, of course, just eliminated them. So the requirement for better brakes where you have hazmat on these cars, better hazmat cars on every car that's carrying hazmat, all of that basically went away. So you've got not only not stronger regulations, which you need, especially with this precision scheduled railroading, but you actually have weaker regulations than we should be having anyway. It's going totally in the wrong direction. And it's going to lead to more and more of these disasters and worse ones.
Yeah. Last question I've got for you, last line of questioning, because, we're looking at the response and all I keep hearing. And look, I give Republicans credit in this moment because they're putting all the blame on Pete Buttigieg. They're putting all the blame on Joe Biden. All the blame's on the government response to this. And it seems like Norfolk Southern's getting kind of away with what happened. They're going to give out $1,000 to every resident in the zip code. So look at how wonderful they are. What is your assessment of the government response to what we saw? You're someone who's worked inside of government. You know how the sausage is made and the wheels turn. What are your thoughts of how the response went?
Well, I think the response is going probably as well as it can. What happens in these situations is once the incident happens, then EPA is in charge with response, cleaning things up, testing the air, testing the water, and they were right in there doing that. It's the NTSB in this case to investigate the causes, and they're right in there doing it. Buttigieg has been getting all the blame on this, but in one sense, once the incident has happened, there's nothing they can do. Their job is to keep things from happening in the first place, and obviously, it's not just it's Congress and also allowing the laws and the agency able to issue regulations. But on the other hand, this does call. There's the phrase "never let a good catastrophe go to waste," right? This is a moment where you can look at corporate responsibility, you can look at the lack of government regulation, the lack of funding for the enforcement agencies, and do something about it. And what I see lacking here is some kind of leadership there, pointing us in that direction, taking advantage of this catastrophe, if you will. And that could have been something, for example, the president could have been doing. It certainly could have been something Buttigieg could have been doing, even if he didn't necessarily have a responsibility in the specific response. Instead, we're kind of letting the right wing take over this, which is bad because they don't have any solutions. Their only solution to this whole thing is to fire Buttigieg. They're not talking about increasing regulations, increasing EPA's budget, making tighter regulations for rail safety, all that. Ask them what their solutions are. You won't hear anything except fire Buttigieg and impeach Biden.
Yeah, it's all about the division. It's all about the distraction. Whereas we should be looking at how do we make sure this doesn't happen again to another community. And end it right here. But again, this is where we are politically in these polar camps, and all we do is lob bombs at each other. But Jordan, I appreciate the time as always. Hope folks will take a look at your website, jordanbarab.com/confined space. We'll get links out on social media how you can take a look at that. Highly suggested. Jordan, appreciate the time, man.
All right. Thanks for inviting me, Rick.
Look forward to talking to you again. Again, jordanbarab.com/confined space. Going to take a quick break. Right back after this. Stick around. You listen to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Q Cells has been like the first around here that focuses on clean energy. For millennials, not a lot of us want to be jumping around job to job trying to figure out what we want to do. But in clean energy, we see a sense of job security and longevity, something that we're going to be able to do for a long time. It's important for Congress to invest in clean energy infrastructure because it sends a positive message to smaller communities like Dalton. It'll provide jobs for those that are struggling to meet their financial needs.
From the steel mills of Pennsylvania to the auto factories of Michigan, to the modern makers movement, manufacturing makes our nation great. I'm Scott Paul, president of the Alliance for American Manufacturing. We bring business and labor together to advocate for policies that everyone can agree on. Together, we can strengthen manufacturing and create good-paying American jobs. Help us keep it made in America.
We are AFGE, the American Federation of Government Employees. We represent 700,000 federal and D.C. government workers who are the vital threads of the fabric of American life. We support our nation's military. We take care of our nation's veterans. We protect our nation's borders. We respond to our nation's crises and natural disasters. We provide services to our nation's seniors. The American Federation of Government Employees. We work for America.
You're listening to The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
So get ready for the next conspiracy theory. Get ready for it. It's coming. The Q folk are already out spinning the next yarn. The greatest thing, someone emailed me and sent me the greatest response to the Q folks. It's basically hillbilly Scientology. So, coming out of the hillbilly Scientology brigade, the balloon, the big balloon, the big Chinese spy balloon. What if the big balloon that was hovering over Montana, secret stuff? What if that balloon wasn't a Chinese balloon after all? Oh no. What if it was Joe Biden and Hunter Biden? What if it was the Bidens? What if it was a super duper secret executive order? Yeah, they are that crazy. One of the theories that's being thrown out there is that this was Biden, because they said this group of Human Events, it's a right-wing publication. They wrote that one theory is that Biden is bought and paid for by communist Chinese. While it's true that Biden and the other officials are certainly compromised by the Chinese, what if the balloon had nothing to do with China? What if the Chinese spy balloon was actually a U.S. spy balloon? What if the administration's insistence that it was Chinese was actually a convenient narrative to hide an almost even more alarming secret? Joe Biden's spying on you. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is coming. It is coming. I guarantee you, Marjorie Three Names and the rest of them, there will be a hearing when they start doing their traveling road shows. It's coming. It is coming. Now, what's interesting is, again, while Marjorie Three Names is calling for a divorce, the country to divorce, it's interesting that whenever something bad happens, who do they turn to? They turn to the federal government. Now, I also find it interesting that you get, these Republican representatives like this Randy Feenstra, Iowa's 4th congressional district representative, who tweeted out that American families continue to suffer from President Biden's wasteful spending. By flooding our economy with $6 trillion, he fueled record inflation and caused paychecks to shrink. Under Speaker McCarthy's leadership, we'll restore fiscal responsibility in Congress. Now, understand, the money hasn't already been spent yet. So this idea that we've spent all this money hasn't been spent yet. And this money that hasn't been spent yet is somehow contributing to inflation is just lunacy. And I find it amazing, utterly amazing, that cutting taxes massively for the very wealthy and for big corporations, adding to our debt was good. I find that extremely hard to believe that that's good. By giving rich people more and corporate America more while taking from the working class is good, but investing in infrastructure, investing in healthcare, investing in things for working people like education, investing in feeding children, somehow that's wasteful and inflationary. What planet do these people live on? And is there a point where lying is ever negative in their world? I want to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com.
I've been driving buses for 5 years, and my day-to-day routine is I wake up a little earlier than most people. I get on a bus, I go out, I pick up some students and make sure they get to school nice and safe. Here in Fairbanks, Alaska, that can be a challenge because of the winter weather and the icy roads. But I love the job. So the Teamsters are great. They provide us a lot of protections. They've always taken care of their people, made sure that our jobs were secure. We didn't have to worry about whether or not we'd have a job from day to day.
And that's amazing because before we'd be working 4, 6, 8 hours a day and only earning minimum wage was real difficult to make a living. Then the Teamsters pushed the law so we make something we can live off of and not have to have a second job. What absolutely gives me peace of mind, the union membership allows me to focus on this job without having to worry about whether or not my family is going to be taken care of. I'm Andrew Case, and I'm proud to be Teamsters Local 959.
Before we close the program, we want to take a moment to thank our viewers and to share a little bit about why we do what we do. At The Rick Smith Show, we believe that media today is almost entirely controlled by corporate greed. So we have now 24-hour news channels. But instead of 24 hours of news, what we get is 1 hour repeated 24 times, and with tons of commercials creating obscene amounts of profits. Information once presented as a public service has now become a private commodity. So when lies make money, lies are what we get. We get a corporate-controlled rage machine feeding us anger and hate, trying to convince us that our problems are right-left or red-blue, when they are and always have been up-down, the wealthiest 1% versus the rest of us. Our goal is to be an alternative to that machine, not as a news show with a fancy journalist out front, but as a talk show run by a union truck driver and a team of working-class heroes just like you. Everything we do, both what we get right and what we get wrong, is dedicated to advancing the interests of America's working families. No corporate ad buys, no think tanks, no focus groups, no talking points. We are media by working people for working people. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.